40 combat missions, 22,000 miles in the Barents Sea, a battle with a German destroyer without a single shell hole, 28 enemy aircraft in one sortie, and not one hit. This ship deserved a monument. It deserved a street named in its honor. It deserved films to be made about it and books to be written. Instead, its name was erased. For decades, they remained silent about it and tried hard to forget. The destroyer, Sokrushitelny, the Northern Fleet. And a story you are hearing today for the first time, or one you thought you knew, but didn't. Because behind this ship lies an Arctic storm that snapped a steel hull in 3 minutes. Officers who broke the cardinal law of the sea. 15 men on a sinking deck at -18 degrees. And their final farewell that leaves a lump in your throat. A tribunal, a death sentence, and one man whom the system condemned, but could not stop. The finale of this story will surprise you, I promise. But for now, Portsmouth, June 1953. A massive ballroom. Candles, white gloves, dress uniforms of fleets from many nations. The scent of wax, tobacco, and sea salt. That salt which no cologne in the world can ever wash out of a tunic. An orchestra, a waltz. In the middle of the hall, a couple is spinning. A young woman in a tiara, straight back, a light smile, movements precise and calm. A Soviet officer in a white dress uniform, broad-shouldered, restrained, confident. They move with ease. The hall around them gradually falls silent, not out of politeness, out of confusion. Her name is Elizabeth. She is 27 years old. A few weeks ago, her coronation took place. She became the Queen of Great Britain. And this waltz is the first official dance of her life in her new status. The ship commanders were lined up by seniority of rank. Ahead stood the Americans, the French, the Allies. Elizabeth walked past them all and stopped in front of the Soviet captain. His name is Rudakov. Olympy Ivanovich Rudakov, captain first rank of the Soviet Navy. In the far corner of the room stands an elderly man, a cigar, a heavy glare from under his eyebrows. He watches the dancing couple as if he wants to stop the orchestra with his gaze. His face grows heavier with every beat. It is Winston Churchill. He is not happy. Not happy at all. No one in this room knows, or almost no one detail of the Soviet captain's biography. A detail that Rudakov himself, naturally, did not advertise at social receptions. 10+ years ago, a military tribunal of the Northern Fleet sentenced him to death by firing squad. He is standing here, dancing with the Queen of Great Britain, smiling. To understand how this was possible, we need a ship. One specific ship, whose name Soviet naval history preferred not to speak aloud for decades. If it was mentioned at all, then hurriedly, in passing, with a bunch of reservations. The destroyer Sokrushitelny, Northern Fleet, November 1942. The Barents Sea, an 11-point storm. Darkness. But before we head there, it is important to understand one thing. This ship deserved a completely different fate. There are ships that are remembered. They get streets named after them. Films are made about them. Their models stand in museums under glass. And there are ships that did everything right and still ended up forgotten. Sokrushitelny was exactly such a ship. It belonged to the Project 7 series of destroyers. The people simply called them Sevens. By the Soviet standards of the 30s, these were modern, fast, well-armed ships. The Sokrushitelny was laid down on October 29, 1936, at the Sergo-Ordzhonikidze shipyard, launched on August 23, 1937. A young ship for a young fleet. The Northern Fleet in those years was the youngest operational formation of the Soviet Navy, and simultaneously the most active. A harsh theater. The Barents Sea forgives no mistakes, neither in peacetime nor, even more so, in wartime. Arctic storms, the polar night, constant cold. This is not a metaphor. These are working conditions. When the war began, Sokrushitelny returned to northern waters on July 4, 1941, and immediately became part of a separate destroyer division. By that moment, there were 5 sevens in the Northern Fleet: Gromky, Grozny, Gremyashi, Sokrushitelny, and our hero. The following months, Sokrushitelny worked. That is exactly what it did. Worked. It went out to shell enemy positions on the shore, met transport convoys coming from Britain to the Soviet Union, hunted for German destroyers in the open sea. Once, during an artillery bombardment of the coast, it was attacked by 28 German aircraft. 28. The ship dodged, returned fire, maneuvered. Not a single hit. Moreover, the anti-aircraft gunners managed to shoot down 1 plane. But the most remarkable thing is something else. Sokrushitelny became the only Soviet destroyer of the Northern Fleet to engage in open artillery combat with a German ship of the same class, with the German destroyer Z-26. Already with the second salvo, the Soviet ship covered the enemy. The German retreated under cover of a smokescreen. Sokrushitelny emerged from this battle without a single hit. Think about this number. From the start of the war until September 1st, 1942, 40 combat missions, 22,385 miles, 1,516 steaming hours at sea. These are not figures from a report. This is fatigue. Diesel fuel and salt. Sleepless watches at -20. Hands frozen to the metal of the gun mounts. This ship had the right to be proud. Its crew had the right to be proud. And everything was heading toward this. Until November 1942. 40 combat missions. 22,000 miles. This ship deserved to become a legend. But fate was already preparing a different script. And it began with the weather forecast. November 1942. Murmansk has been burning for a year and a half. The war in the north is a separate war. There are no front lines in the usual sense here. There is the sea, the cold, and the routes. Routes along which convoys with equipment, fuel, and provisions go from Britain to the Soviet Union. Tanks, planes, canned food, boots. All this floats through the Arctic. And all this must be brought in alive. Convoy QP-15 left Arkhangelsk on November 17, 1942. 26 Allied transports, 11 British escort ships, a huge, slow column of vessels stretching across the leaden water. To strengthen the escort in the zone of responsibility of the Northern Fleet, Soviet ships joined the convoy. The destroyer leader, Baku, under the command of Captain 2nd Rank Belyaev, and the destroyer, Sokrushitelny, under the command of Captain 3rd Rank Kurelek. The task was simple and impossible at the same time: to escort the convoy, not to lose a single transport, to return. At first, everything went according to plan. But the Barents Sea in November is not just cold water. It is a living creature with a character, and its character is foul. Just a few hours after departure, the barometer dropped. The sky was covered with low, heavy clouds. Not gray, but almost black, like asphalt soaked in fuel oil. The wind intensified. Then it intensified again. Imagine, you are standing on an open bridge. The air temperature drops to the -18 mark. The wind tears foam from the waves and throws it into your face. Salty, sharp, icy. The metal of the railings burns through your gloves. The horizon has vanished. All around, only water, sky, and snow, which have long since merged into one gray nothingness. By November 20th, the storm reached 11 points. 11 points is not bad weather. It is when waves as high as a 3-story house strike the ship's side with such force that people inside hold on to everything they can. It is when the metal hull groans and creaks so much that it seems a little more and it won't hold. It is when visibility drops to 0 due to snow squalls, and the neighboring ship, which was moving 100 meters from you, simply vanishes. The convoy scattered. It became impossible to guard it. But, strangely enough, it was the storm that now protected the transports better than any escort. Neither a German submarine nor aviation worked in such conditions. Having requested permission from the convoy commander to return to base and receiving an affirmative answer, the Soviet ships turned back. Baku and Sokrushitelny went together, or rather, tried to go together. Baku took a beating. The blows of the waves compromised the hull's integrity. Only one boiler out of several remained in operation. The leader barely crawled, but it crawled, held on, fighting through the storm toward Polyarny with great difficulty. Sokrushitelny was less lucky. The waves tossed it like a tin can. The speed dropped to a minimum. And at some point, no one would later say exactly when, because in such weather time loses its meaning, Sokrushitelny lost sight of Baku. The ship launched flares. They turned on the spotlight. Its beam beat against a wall of snow and dissolved in it, reaching nothing. They tried to establish radio contact. Silence. Baku was gone. And here it is worth pausing for a second. The commander of the leader, Baku, was responsible not only for his ship. Sokrushitelny was under his command. In fact, it turned out that at the moment when the situation became critical, the leader went ahead and abandoned the destroyer alone against the storm. One can explain this by the dire state of Baku itself, which was barely staying afloat. One can. But an explanation is not a justification. Sokrushitelny remained alone. The Barents Sea, November, 11 points. Darkness. And somewhere in this darkness, in this chaos of water, wind, and snow, the ship fought. The engines were running. The crew held on. It seemed, well, the storm will pass. We'll make it back under our own power. It seemed. At 14:30, a crack was heard from the stern. Not a creak, not a groan of metal, precisely a crack, as if someone had broken a huge bone. 3 minutes. Remember this number. 3 minutes. That is all the people in the stern compartments had. 3 minutes between the sound and the end. A wave strike, a crack, then a silence lasting a second. That special silence that occurs only at the moment when something irreparable has already happened, but the brain has not yet managed to comprehend it. And then the ship shuddered. Not swayed, shuddered, with its entire hull, like a living creature that had just been done something terrible. The stern section of Sokrushitelny tore off and went to the bottom, in 3 minutes. 6 sailors did not manage to get out. They were there, in the stern compartments, at their battle stations, and at some point they ceased to be, together with the part of the ship that a second ago was beneath them. Think about this, not as a number. 6 people. The sea in the Barents in November, -18 air, water just above zero. This is not drowning. This is vanishing. But that was only the beginning. Because when the stern went to the bottom, the depth charges went with it. The very ones that were prepared for combat use and set to a specific depth. A few seconds later, they reached it. The explosion was monstrous. Imagine, the ship has already lost its stern. It is barely staying afloat in an 11-point storm. Waves 10 meters high strike the open fracture where the bottom had just been. And at this moment, from below, from the depths, a strike of such force that people on deck could not stand on their feet. The remaining compartments began to fill with water, quickly. And here is where what is rarely spoken about in gala histories of the fleet manifests. At the moment of absolute chaos, when the ship is broken, when water is coming in, when it is -18 outside and a storm, the sailors did not run away. They worked. They plugged, sealed, fought the water with all the means at hand, without panic, methodically. It was their actions, and only theirs, that kept what was left of Sokrushitelny afloat. The ship survived, for now, but it lost headway, completely. Now it was not a combat ship. It was a steel box without a stern, which the Barents Sea tossed wherever it wanted, without the ability to steer. without the ability to go to the base on its own, without any ability to do anything at all, except one thing: to hold on and wait for help. And here, remember this moment. While the sailors in the holds, knee-deep in icy water, fought for the ship's survivability, something else was happening on the bridge. Something that Soviet naval history preferred to remain silent about for decades. We will return to this in a minute. First, the help. Because the command learned about the accident and orders had already been given, Admiral Golovko ordered the leader Baku to immediately go to the aid of Sokrushitelny. At the same time, destroyers were sent to the site of the disaster, old ships of the Novik type and the destroyer Kubyshev. They had to find in the stormy sea, in the dark, in a snow squall, a fragment of a ship without lights, without speed, without a stern. And they found it. The conditions in which the rescue operation began must be called directly. Wind, 11 points. Snow squalls. Waves, 10 meters high. Air temperature, -18. This is not a storm. This is a hurricane. The ship held on. The people held on. One thing remained: to stay together. But that is precisely what did not happen. There is an unwritten law of the sea, as old as seafaring itself. It is not written in any regulation because it does not need to be written. It is known by everyone who has ever gone to sea on a warship. The commander leaves the ship last. Not second to last. Not when things got really bad. Last. On Sokrushitelny, this law was broken. When rescue ships pulled up to the side of the broken destroyer and the evacuation began, the following was revealed. The officer staff did not leave the ship last. Moreover, at the moment when people should have been organizing the evacuation, directing the crew, making decisions, the officers did nothing of the sort. The crew was left without command. Imagine this picture: a broken ship in an 11-point storm, waves covering the deck, compartments filling with water, -18. And the sailors, not the officers, but the sailors, were forced to make decisions on their own, to organize, to choose who would lead them. They chose a new commander themselves. This is not heroism. This was a necessity. But the fact that the sailors coped with this necessity, while their officers were thinking about their own salvation, speaks volumes about the people on the lower decks, more than any official characterization. All this was not happening in the dark or in secret. The sailors from the rescue ships saw what was happening. That is why later all this ended up in the investigation materials. It was impossible to hide what was seen. Now about one specific person. The ship's assistant commander, Lieutenant Commander Rudakov. According to official investigation documents, at the moment of the disaster, he strapped 3 life belts to himself. 3. 1 is enough. 3 is no longer caution. But that is not all. Rudakov sent a message to the passing ships. Here is its essence. Save us. The end is coming. Approach immediately. The ship is sinking. This would be understandable if the ship were indeed sinking at that moment. But Sokrushitelny was still staying afloat at that moment. It was broken. It had no speed. The situation was critical, but it was afloat. This detail became one of the key points of the indictment. In the end, the rescue ships managed to take 192 people off Sokrushitelny. 192. Out of those who remained alive after the stern was torn off. During the evacuation itself, another 14 people died. The Barents Sea in November leaves no room for error, neither for a ship nor for a person. All ships involved in the rescue operation sustained damage from the storm. The storm tore tow lines like threads. They tried to take Sokrushitelny in tow more than 10 times, and each time the cable snapped. Taking the damaged ship and bringing it to the base did not work. When the fuel on the rescue ships was running low, the evacuation operation was stopped. The ship set a course for the base. Sokrushitelny was left alone. People were still on it. Those who had not been taken off in time. Those who remained on the half-flooded, broken, drifting ship in the open Barents Sea. When Kubyshev and other ships were leaving, A rocket soared from the bridge of the Sokrushitelny, lying in a list. Then another one. Then more. The commanders of the departing ships at first tried to check the launches against the signal table. They decided that the emergency ship wanted to communicate something. But the rockets continued to soar, one after another, slowly, evenly. There were 15 of them in total. 15 rockets. 15 people who remained on board. They were saying goodbye. 15 people, not abstract those remaining on board. 15 specific people. Each had a name. Each had a home somewhere on the shore. Some of them probably managed to write a letter before going out to sea. Some did not. Now they stood on the half-flooded deck of the broken ship in the Barents Sea. November. Darkness. -18. The rescue ships were leaving, their silhouettes dissolved in the snow squall, becoming smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely. And it was then that the first rocket soared from Sokrushitelny. Bright. Lonely. In the blackness of the Arctic night. Then the second. The departing ships stopped. The commanders looked into the darkness. The rockets continued to soar, slowly, at regular intervals. Not a distress signal, not a request for help. Something else. The third, the fourth, the fifth. When they counted 15, everything became clear. It was a farewell. Think about this. At the moment when most people think only of one thing, to survive, at any cost, in any way, these 15 people thought of something else. They wanted to be seen, to know they are here, they are holding on, they have not surrendered. Each rocket is a name. Each rocket is a choice to remain human to the end. When new ships arrived at the site of the ship sinking, Sokrushitelny was already gone. The Barents Sea in November does not wait. It makes no exceptions for steel or people. The ship, which held on for several hours against everything, against the storm, against the break, against the icy water in the compartments, in the end did not hold out. It went down. Together with those who remained on board. With those who performed their duty to the last. With those who launched 15 rockets into the Arctic night. The sea took what was its own. On the surface, nothing remained except waves, snow, and darkness. The Barents Sea looked exactly the same as it did an hour before, and a day before, indifferent and huge. It did not know that something significant had happened. It knew nothing at all. The people on the departing ships knew. Admiral Golovko in Polyarny knew, who was briefed on the progress of the operation. And now it was necessary to answer the question that never remained unanswered in the Soviet fleet. Who is to blame? On November 26, 1942, the People's Commissar of the Soviet Navy, Admiral Kuznetsov, signed a directive on the investigation of the circumstances of the destroyer Sokrushitelny's sinking. The machine began to work. In the Soviet military system, investigations of this kind moved quickly. Not because the system was effective, although sometimes it was, but because in wartime, delay in establishing the guilty was perceived as weakness. The guilty had to be found. Punishment had to be assigned. The sentence had to be carried out. The military tribunal of the Northern Fleet collected testimony, studied the circumstances, heard those who saw what was happening on Sokrushitelny from the outside, from the decks of the rescue ships. The picture that emerged was unambiguous. The sentence was handed down. The ship's commander, Captain 3rd Rank Kurilek, execution. Combat Unit Commander, 2nd Rank Ishenko, execution. The wording? Violation of military discipline, cowardice, and faint-heartedness shown during the ship's sinking. Political Commissar Kolmakov, 10 years in camps. Combat Unit Commanders Anisimov, Grigoriev, and Sukharev, Penal Battalion. Read this list again, slowly. These are not abstract names. These are the officers of a ship that had honestly served 40 combat missions in the Barents Sea. A ship that had fought the German destroyer Z-26 and emerged from battle without a single shell hole. A ship whose crew maintained dignity at the most terrible moment, while its commanders lost theirs. Now, separately, Lieutenant Commander Rudakov. His case was reviewed in the same way. The accusations were concrete. Strapped 3 lifebelts to himself, sent a signal to passing ships that the ship was sinking, at a time when the ship was still afloat, effectively spreading panic and disorganizing the rescue operation. The tribunal deemed the evidence sufficient. The sentence, execution. The same as the commanders and Ishenko's. But here a man intervened, without whom this story would have ended very differently. Vice Admiral Golovko, commander of the Northern Fleet, petitioned for the commutation of the sentence. Why exactly Rudakov and not the others? The sources do not say directly. Perhaps Golovko saw in him something the tribunal did not. Perhaps there were other considerations. We do not know. We know the result. The death sentence for Rudakov was commuted. The new decision, deprivation of the rank of lieutenant commander and 10 years of corrective labor camps, with a deferment of execution until the end of hostilities. This could have been the end of the story. De facto, life saved, career destroyed, name erased. But in March 1943, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union changed this measure as well. A penal battalion. Think about the logic of this decision. A man who had just been stripped of his military rank for cowardice was sent to fight. Not to the rear, not to a camp, to the front line, into a penal unit, where the average life expectancy was measured not in months, in sorties. 2 or 3 sorties. The system gave him a chance to die with a weapon in his hands. This was considered mercy. The Rybachi Peninsula, the Karelian Front, one of the most brutal sectors of the northern theater of operations. Rudakov arrived there as a private, former lieutenant commander, former assistant commander of a destroyer, now a private in the 50th Separate Penal Company of the Karelian Front. No rank, no position, no past that would have any meaning here. In penal units, they didn't ask who you were before. Here, there was only one currency: to survive today, to go out tomorrow. Rudakov was assigned to boats. Boats are small vessels that delivered ammunition and hot food to the forward edge of the defense. Sounds mundane, but here's what it meant in practice. The route passed under fire. There were no shelters. The enemy knew these routes. The average life expectancy of a boat crew was 2 to 3 sorties. Not 2 to 3 months, 2 to 3 sorties. Rudakov survived them all. Then, what was likely inevitable happened. The former naval officer with an artillery specialty was noticed. Not as a former officer, as a man who knows how to do what is needed here. He was appointed assistant commander of a mortar platoon, and then commander of an anti-tank battery, as a private. Think about this detail. A man without a military rank, officially convicted of cowardice, commanded an anti-tank battery on one of the most difficult sectors of the northern theater of operations. Not because the system decided to give him a chance, but because on the front line, it is quickly revealed who can fight and who cannot. Rudakov could. Here it is worth asking a question that sources leave without an answer. What moved this man? Fear of the system, which had already done everything it could to him? A desire to prove something? To the tribunal? The fleet? Himself? Or simply stubbornness? That special breed of stubbornness that is not explained by logic and cannot be broken by any sentence. We do not know. We know only the result. After another shrapnel wound, not the first, in January 1944, by order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Private Rudakov was restored to the military rank of lieutenant commander and sent to the disposal of the commander of the Northern Fleet. Let's go back a second. November 1942, tribunal, execution, then camp, then penal battalion, Rybachi, boats, anti-tank battery, shrapnel. January 1944. Lieutenant Commander Rudikov returns to the fleet. 15 months. 15 months from a death sentence to a return to duty. When he arrived in Polyarny, the war was still going on. But something had changed, both in the war and in Rudikov himself. A man who had gone through a tribunal, a penal battalion, and Ribachi looked at the fleet differently. And the fleet, after some time, began to look at him differently. Lieutenant Commander Rudikov received an appointment as assistant commander of the destroyer Gromky, the same Gromky that once, together with Sokrushitelny, was part of the same division. The circle closed, but the story did not end there. It was just starting to speed up. The war was coming to an end. It was felt in everything, in the pace of operations, in the tone of orders, in how people began to think not only about surviving today, but also about what would come after. The Northern Fleet was preparing for its final operations, and in this fleet, Lieutenant Commander Rudikov appeared again. He returned quietly, without fanfare, without explanations. He simply came to Gromky as assistant commander and started working. The Northern Fleet is a small world. Everyone knows everyone here, and everyone knew who Rudikov was and where he had returned from. But in the fleet, there is another rule, unspoken, like many rules that really work. What a man is doing now is more important than what he did before. Rudikov did his job. Already in mid-1944, he was performing the duties of commander of the destroyer Doblesny. In October of that same year, officially appointed commander. Think about the pace. January 1944. Returned to the fleet as assistant. October 1944. Commander of a destroyer. 10 months. As commander of Doblesny, Rudikov participated in the escort of the icebreakers Stalin and Severny Vetter from the Kara Sea. Conducted 7 operations to search for and destroy enemy submarines. 71 convoy operations for guiding domestic and allied transports. 71. In 1945, by order of the People's Commissar of the Navy, Captain 3rd Rank Rudikov received an appointment as senior assistant on the flagship of the Northern Fleet, the battleship Arkhangelsk. Flagship. Senior assistant. A man whom the tribunal had sentenced to death 3 years ago was serving on the fleet's flagship. Then, commander of the cruiser Murmansk. A young captain 2nd rank with a personnel file in which the sentence of the military tribunal remained forever. A personnel file which he, apparently, learned to carry within himself so that it did not interfere with moving forward. In 1952, Captain 1st Rank Rudikov took command of the newest light cruiser of Project 68 Bis on the Baltic. The best ship of its class in the Soviet fleet at that moment. Swift, modern, beautiful, if one can even call a warship beautiful. Its name was Sverdlov, and here, while Rudikov was mastering the new ship, training the crew, taking the cruiser out for exercises, an event took place in London that would change the trajectory of this entire story. On February 6, 1952, King George VI of Great Britain died. His daughter ascended the throne, a young woman of 25. Her coronation was set for June 2, 1953. In honor of this event, an international naval parade was organized in Portsmouth. Fleets from many countries received invitations. The Soviet Union received an invitation too. It was decided to send the cruiser Sverdlov to the parade, under the command of Captain 1st Rank Rudikov. When he received this order, what he felt, we do not know. Documents are silent about this. But we know something else. A man who had traveled the path from a death sentence to the commander of a cruiser was going to Portsmouth, to England, to the fleets of the whole world. He did not yet know that in Portsmouth, something awaited him besides the naval parade. He did not know that the Queen would be waiting for him in Portsmouth. June 1953, Portsmouth. The cruiser Sverdlov drops anchor among ships from all over the world. Captain First Rank Rudakov puts on his dress uniform, and at this moment, Winston Churchill does not yet suspect how many cigars he will have to smoke tonight. Portsmouth met Sverdlov the way the British fleet knows how to meet guests, with dignity, with ceremony, and with that special cold attention that actually means very close interest. The cruiser dropped anchor among ships from all over the world. Americans, French, Dutch, Norwegians. Flags of dozens of countries on the water. The sun. Dress uniforms. And somewhere in this line, a Soviet cruiser with a captain in whose personnel file the sentence of a military tribunal would remain forever. The award ceremony took place on board a British battleship. The ship commanders were lined up on deck in order of seniority of military rank. The logic is simple and understandable. American and French admirals in front, captains of lower rank further down the line. Everything according to protocol. Everything predictable. Elizabeth walked along the line. A young woman. She was 27 years old. A few weeks ago, she had officially become the Queen of Great Britain. The coronation was behind her. Ahead, decades of reign, which she did not yet know about then. She walked along the battleship deck, past admirals, past captains, past the entire correct order of things, and stopped in front of the Soviet captain. Violating protocol, violating the order, violating everything that was supposed to be violated in this situation, she approached Rudakov first and handed him an award. American admirals were standing in the line. They were watching. Then there was a ball. A large gala event attended by ship commanders, official delegations, diplomats, and, to the side, with a cigar and the face of a man for whom something had gone wrong, Winston Churchill. The orchestra began a waltz. Elizabeth approached Rudakov. Here one needs to understand a detail that explains why the British press later exploded. This was not just the first dance of the evening. This was the first official dance of Elizabeth's life in the status of queen. The first. And she chose the Soviet captain. They spun in a waltz. The couple moved with ease. Rudakov, apparently, knew how to dance as confidently as he knew how to fight. The queen smiled. They were conversing about something, casually, as if there were no hall, no admirals, no Churchill with his heavy glare around them. Churchill watched. With every beat, his face became heavier. When the dance ended, the story did not end. Elizabeth introduced Rudakov to her sister, Princess Margaret. The Soviet captain danced the second dance with her. Churchill watched. Then Elizabeth, ignoring the official Soviet delegation, which was likely watching what was happening with growing horror, invited Rudakov to a private audience. At which, by the way, Princess Margaret was also present. Churchill left the reception. The British press wrote everything it could think of the next day, and it could think of a lot. But the story did not end there. The next morning, a boat approached the side of Sverdlov. On the boat was a bouquet. More precisely, to call it just a bouquet is impossible. The vessel was so densely packed with flowers that the boat itself looked like a floating garden. With a card. The flowers were a gift from Princess Margaret. And here happened something the princess clearly did not expect. Rudakov was allergic to flowers. The captain, without overthinking, gave a simple order: distribute them to the sailors, which was immediately carried out. The crew of the cruiser Sverdlov, it must be assumed, looked picturesque that day. The next day, Princess Margaret arrived on board for a visit. She walked into the captain's cabin, looked around. The bouquet was not there. "Where are my flowers?" the princess asked. Rudakov did not lose his composure for a second. "The crew was so charmed by your highness that I distributed your roses among them." The princess was silent, then smiled. Soon, a new bouquet arrived on Sverdlov, and together with it, an invitation. Princess Margaret was inviting the captain on a 10-day tour of old castles in Britain. Moscow found out about this invitation. To refuse was impossible. It would be a diplomatic scandal. To accept in full was also impossible, for reasons that were not explained in Moscow. As a result, the tour was shortened to 2 days. The trip took place. They say that when Sverdlov left Portsmouth, The Queen and Princess Margaret stood on the pier for a long time, watched the departing cruiser, stood until it disappeared behind the horizon. Then they turned and left. And over Europe, the Iron Curtain descended again, as if nothing had happened. After Portsmouth, Rudikov's career went where the careers of people who know how to do their job flawlessly go. Appointment as Chief of Staff of the Squadron of the 4th Naval Fleet in the Baltic. Rear Admiral shoulder boards. Then, Naval Academy. First, head of the Department of Organization of Operational and Combat Training. Then, head of the Department of Force Management of the Command Faculty. He taught, passed on knowledge to young officers of the Soviet fleet. People who, most likely, never found out, or found out only marginally, in passing, who exactly their professor was in November 1942 on board a broken destroyer in the Barents Sea. Olympy Ivanovich Rudikov died on June 2, 1974, in Leningrad. Buried at the Serefimovskoye Cemetery. Stop at this date for a second. June 2nd. The coronation of Elizabeth II took place on June 2, 1953. To the day, exactly 21 years later, Rudikov was gone. A coincidence. Just a coincidence. But one of those coincidences that are remembered. Now, the main question. What kind of story was this? One could say that this is a story about cowardice and redemption. A man broke at the moment of the disaster, and then spent his whole life proving that it was not him, or not all of him. One could say that this is a story about the Soviet system, merciless and at the same time strangely flexible. A system that could sentence a man to death in the morning and send him to die on the front line in the evening. That could erase a name from history and at the same time send the same man to represent the country before the whole world. One could say that this is a story about a ship. About Sokrushitelny, 40 combat missions, 22,000 miles, a battle with a German destroyer, 28 planes without a single hit. A ship that deserved a better fate and received the worst. A ship that is not on a single monument, not on a single memorial plaque. 15 rockets into the Arctic night. 15 people who remain on board to the end. The sources did not preserve their names, or did not want to preserve them. But there was one more thing worth saying. In June 1953, in Portsmouth, a young queen violated protocol, walked past admirals, stopped in front of a Soviet captain, invited him to the first dance of her life in the status of a monarch. Why? We do not know. No one wrote down the explanation. Maybe she was attracted to something in his face, that special breed of calmness that exists only in people who have already looked into the worst and did not look away. Maybe it was a conscious political gesture, maybe just an accident. But here is what is certain. In that hall stood people with flawless biographies, people with awards received in the correct order, at the correct time, for the correct actions. People whose personnel files read as exemplary. And among them stood a man in whose personnel file the sentence of a military tribunal for cowardice would remain forever. The Queen chose him, not because she did not know, but perhaps precisely because she saw something that does not fit into a personnel file. Something that remains in a person after the system does everything it can to them. After the tribunal, after Ribachi, after shrapnel, after everything. What exactly? Everyone decides for themselves. Let's go back to where we started. Portsmouth, June 1953. Ballroom, orchestra, waltz. A Soviet captain in a white dress uniform spins in a dance with the Queen of Great Britain. Churchill watches from the corner. His face is heavier than usual. Rudikov smiles. The Barents Sea, thousands of kilometers from here, looks exactly the same as in November 1942. Dark water, wind, waves, and somewhere on the bottom, Sokrushitelny, 40 combat missions, 22,000 miles, 15 rockets in the dark. It is gone, but it was, and that cannot be taken away. Thank you for watching, friends. See you in the next video.